Welcome to Exposure Therapy, and today my guest is John Schell, a commercial and lifestyle photographer out of Los Angeles. John, thanks for coming out today. I really appreciate you coming out.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, my second episode of this podcast, I spoke to photographer Bram J. And when I asked him for kind of his sources of inspiration, other photographers he looks up to or studies the work of, he brought up your name as someone that's really kind of mentored him and helped him out in his growth and his journey in this industry. And I was just really excited after checking you out on some of the socials to have you on to display some of your work and talk about your journey. And how did you get into all of this?
Yeah, I appreciate Bram. Just to start, Bram is wonderful. He's absolutely selling himself short. He was more than fine on his own, and we developed a friendship through some photography questions. How I got started, it was interesting. In my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I had started doing some videos back in the mid 90s, I want to say. And it was basically like filming with, this was all pre-digital, filming with, high 8, Super 8, and then editing with 2 VCRs. Very low budget, very just sort of, low budget would be the best way to describe it. And I was putting videos together, kind of got into photography a little bit as a side thing, just to kind of supplement some of the film. And fast forward, I put it down, went to college, got a real job, and then wound up going on a backpacking trip through Europe in about 2007-ish, and I had been teaching at that point and had the summer off, and was basically like, oh, I'm gonna go through Europe for the summer. I'll need a camera, and little point and shoot. Didn't really think too much of it. Came home with a few thousand photos, started going through them, and was kind of like, I really enjoyed that. It sparked something that had been sort of latent, I guess, or hibernating in me. Was going to school for my master's at the time, and a friend of mine had brought in his one of his DSLRs, and he was just sort of taking pictures, and I was like, oh, let me see that. And from that point on, like it's pretty much all a blur. I wound up within like weeks of that moment, I had gotten my own DSLR for the first time. I was taking pictures. I was just absolutely loving and throwing myself into it head first. And that started off, this whole second or next chapter where, one person asked me to take their photos, and another person asked me to take their photos. And then I was, a small brand had asked me, and then another brand. And then I was like, well, I could actually maybe think about leaving teaching. And I said, well, let me try it for a year and see what happens. And I left teaching in 2014. And then if I thought it had been a blur before that, it was a blur after that. It was, I moved to Los Angeles, started putting myself out there as a freelance photographer. There have been highs and there have been lows, and there has been like a middle ground, but it's been almost 10 years, I guess now. And it's actually been working really well. I don't want to say surprisingly well, because I don't, I'm, I'm always surprised by it, but it's been decent. And I've picked up an agency representation earlier this year, and that's gotten me some good fun jobs. I've been traveling a bunch this year so far. And it's one of those things where when you stop to take a breath, you're kind of like, oh, okay.
It reminded me of something that Bruce Lee once said when he was on a talk show. They asked him if he was good. He said, if you say yes, I'm good, then people think you're full of yourself. If you say no, they know you're lying.
There's a lot of truth to that. And I'll be the last person to say, oh, I'm good, I deserve this. But at the same time, like you do recognize the amount of work that you put in, and you recognize the growth, and you recognize, when you stop and you look back and you say, wow, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was here, and now I'm here. And those moments always, it's one of those things where you it's very, I guess, almost like cinematic, where you're kind of in the full blown tornado of this big shoot, and there are people going back and forth, and everything is sort of this organized chaos, and you stop and you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is great. This is what I really signed up for, and this is, it's working what I'm doing. Um, yeah. So things can always be faster. Things can always work better. Things can always, be. Um, but I guess that's just the moment we live in, where there's this ability to compare ourselves to everybody
At the same time, like right away.
yeah, at the same time. So, everything has its own time, but at the same time, you can almost say, well, I wish it would happen faster.
That was one thing. I was just signed up for a new photography photo sharing app, and I was just scrolling through the feed, and I noticed like my photos are, and it's just it's very minimalistic layout. It's called Glass. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. But you have your photos like side by side with the other people's photos. There's no like text, no captions. It's just the photos, and I'm like, wow, it's like you're looking at your photos like side by side with everybody else, and it's really interesting to have that side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Don't compare yourself to others, but it's a side by side comparison.
Yeah, I know the app. I'm familiar with it. I know they had started a couple of years ago, and I don't know that I'm ready for side-by-side comparisons just yet.
So I asked Bram the question of how it was for him in Los Angeles, being probably a pretty saturated industry, especially when you're doing the type of shooting that you're doing. So how did you as a freelancer stand out and kind of make it for yourself in Los Angeles, which was maybe the most saturated industry in the world?
It definitely is, probably second only to New York in terms of photographers per square. I don't even think it's per square mile. It's almost like per square block, because it's just at any given moment I can walk out on my street and I might see 2 or 3 photo shoots happening. Granted, there's small shoots, and it's not a ton of stuff happening, but you drive through the city and you just see constant video, film, commercial, all that kind of stuff happening. So how to stand out? That is a great question. And if there was a formula to it, and I'm going to say if there was a simple formula to it, if there was a complicated formula to it, it would be easy to understand. But it's one of those things where there's, obviously networking is huge. And especially in this industry, it's who you know, who you're friends with, who you meet up with. But that only takes you so far. There's also, talent. There's also hard work. There's also being an individual. But at the same time, there's also shooting and photographing and putting work out there that is commercially viable. Meaning, as much as I would love to shoot moody black and whites of, candles burning in a field, that's not going to get me the work that is going to pay my rent. It has to be, you have to sort of stand out by almost like not necessarily standing out too much, which saying it out loud doesn't make much sense. But if you're in a group of, say, 100 photographers and everybody's shooting the same thing, I am not 100% sure. I think it comes down to networking. I think it comes down to having an individual style. It comes down to having a commercially viable body of work that people can look at and say, oh, this is what we want to shoot for our next campaign or whatever it is. And I think that's where I sort of got lost in the beginning was, there are so many different avenues to go down in terms of being a artist or being a photographer or videographer, any of that stuff. And I think when you're starting out, it's so easy to just look and say, well, I want to shoot everything. And I want to shoot, I'm going to shoot fitness and fashion and lifestyle and this and commercial and pharma and everything. And I think the most important decision I made in terms of bringing in, having a good return on what I was putting out there is sticking to, is recognizing strengths and running with those strengths. Like I knew early on that I wasn't going to be shooting like Vogue covers because I had no interest in it prior to picking up a camera. All of a sudden, now that I'm like shooting fashion, you know what I mean? Like, it's not one of those things like, oh, all of a sudden I'm interested in like this couture fashion or something like that. But what I was interested in was, you know, lifestyle, surfing and California and all that kind of stuff. So, and you know, that lends itself to it's almost this circular sort of thing where you're, what do I love? What do I love shooting? What's going to bring me in some more work that's going to enable me to shoot more of what I love, sort of thing. Um, so to answer your question, how to stand out, I think it's so many different things. I don't think there's just one way to do it. And how I did it was basically networking and shooting as much as I could and putting out work that I felt was better than my previous work.
Mm. Now, one thing I love about your work is like you're posing, and I put it in air quotes there because it looks pushing it at like that perfect spot. So do you pose your models, or do you have them just move around naturally and just try and look for the opportunity to capture? How does that process work for you?
I have when I started out, there was a lot of posing, and it was a lot of just sort of stand here, do this kind of thing. And the photos, you know, some of them were good, some of them were not good. A lot of them were not good. And then the more I kind of got into it, and the more I kind of threw myself into not only what I loved, but also like what's working and what is the industry like, and what do brands like, and um, there's definitely in my work, I think there was a brief moment of posing, and then from a certain point, I can't exactly remember what it was, where it was like, oh, I like movement, and I want movement, I want natural, you know, moments that they might be contrived in terms of like, yeah, it's a model and we're going out to do a photo shoot, but the moments themselves are authentic and real because that's what's actually happening. Um, so there's a couple of pictures you'll see. Probably most of the ones that you'll see that we have here are let's just see what happens. And the emotion is real, the smiles are real, the movement is real. And I think that to me is what feels most comfortable and most at home, because it's how I like to capture stuff.
You're creating a little playground structure, like a boundary to play within, but then within that boundary, you have all that freedom.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And it works. And, you know, it's, you know, there's the completely unplanned stuff in terms of like street photography, which is beautiful. And I love doing that. But there's got to be some sort of structure in terms of, you know, model shoots and portfolio work, because it's, you know, if you both wind up just sitting there saying, okay, well, what are we going to do?
It's interesting. I always relate street photography to jazz, which I also love, because of the improvisational element to it. But when I think about it, what you're talking about is actually more truly like jazz, because jazz is a democratic, right? You know, you have the trio, you have the whoever, unless it's like a solo player, they have to work together to create the art, right? In that moment. Now they might be improvising, but and they're adhering to certain structures, but they're working together to the same purpose. Street photography, I'm just going up and I'm capturing an image of somebody. They may or may not even be aware that I'm doing that. Whereas in the situation you're talking about, you are improvising, but within that structure. So you and the model are both working together to create that art. So I think what you're doing is more of jazz photography.
I'm glad you're able to explain it, because it's one of those things where you like music, when you look back at it and you're like, I don't know what I was doing, because I play a guitar very poorly, and I have for the last 20 years. And there are some things, you know, I can play. There's some ear training that I've done and that sort of thing. And yeah, if you have the structure of the, you know, the chords or the key or whatever, it relates very well, actually. It's a great analogy for it.
So without further ado, let's take a look at some of your images here.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Tell me about what's going on here.
So this is probably a perfect example. And I think they're all going to be great examples of what we just talked about. Is this was, you know, we were heading for a shoot. we were stuck in traffic, and we said, "Oh, let's make a turn here and see what we find." And we found this field, and we were just sort of, I think I may have been laying on the ground, and she was just sort of going about her movements. And I love the way it works because, and not to sort of look back and sort of, I guess, quantify my work or explain it or whatever, but I love the image because it's posed, but it's natural. The hair being caught because she's doing like mid flip, but there's there's something to it that really struck me when I saw that against the other images of that, brief moment. Um, yeah, and I think it shows the clothes really well. Which, I've gotten some feedback on this photo, and people really like it. I do too, but I was just sort of, they kind of related it to like, oh, it looks like a field in England or something very kind of much higher, um, much more elevated than what it actually was.
And the pose again, the movement, whatever. It's not what you typically see in a fashion shoot, right? So it's unusual in that way, and so it stands out. Uh, quick quick question for you. You're asking them to move their bodies around and do whatever, not actually pose. Do you do much work with dancers?
I don't actually. Yeah, no, I've never actually. Maybe people who happen to dance, but I've never actually purposely shot any dancers or anything like that.
I found the few times I've had the luck to work with some dancers, they do some great movement
Mm.
with their body, and I find it's just easier for me to work with them because I don't have to pose them or tell them. They just know how to move, and they move
And
in interesting ways. And this reminded me of that.
yeah, yeah, no, but I feel the same way about working with actors and shooting them also because you're able to tell them this is your character, and they are like, oh, okay, I get it, I can relate to that, and then they're in character, and especially with um where it's more of like an urban environment, I guess. Like
Right.
being out in a field, we're just sort of, messing around, taking photos. But if we're walking down a city street, this is who you are. You just left a meeting. You got this expression on your face. And they, a lot of them get it. And it makes my job much more interesting and easier, but also interesting because you're in that moment also. And you're part of that sort of cinematic experience, I guess.
Awesome. All right. What's happening here?
So this was part of the shoot we did in New Orleans, and I mean, it's not by any means more like a spectacular photo, but for me, it was one of the things. We shot this on film. It's one of the photos that came out that I really loved, um, and it was kind of a turning point for me because I had always sort of flirted with shooting specifically menswear for a while, and because that's something that really appeals to me. And despite my old sweatshirt now, but um, it's something that really appeals to me, and it's something that I enjoy. I do pay attention to menswear and casual menswear and that kind of stuff. And once I started kind of putting more of it out there, I had gotten hired by this brand, Billy Reed, to come to New Orleans and shoot one of their campaigns. And this was, I think, our first day shooting this fall winter look. It was probably about 97 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 100% humidity at the moment.
Jeez.
And we were all
Wool
just,
jackets.
exactly. It was like you couldn't have put more clothes on these poor guys. Um, but it was just one of those things where I saw the photos afterwards and I said, oh, I love the way it looks because it's kind of got like a classic. Um, it struck me as something that I had always looked at when I was younger in terms of like menswear ads and just, the posing, the moment, the everything that went into the shoot was something that I really loved. And I love that this is an example from that shoot.
And it looks very natural too. It looks like there's two buddies like taking a break from something, having a chat at the bottom of the stairs, like just like you walked. It almost looks like a street image, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That's probably what I love about it is that just everything kind of comes together where it's posed a little bit, but it's also like these guys are both total pros, have been in the industry for ages, and they knew, it's like actors. They knew the plan.
Awesome. And this is from that same shoot in New Orleans, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. So the brand had one of the setups was shooting at Preservation Hall, which is this famous historic jazz venue in the heart of the French Quarter, and we had been shooting stills, and the video team was there shooting, and this was the band that they hired. They're the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, and three of the members showed up, and they blew us away. I love the photo. I love the highlights. I love, there's a lot of it that I love, but I love it for so many other reasons other than the aesthetics of it. He was playing and singing at this moment. It's a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, I believe. And just, the whole crew was there, and we're all kind of looking at each other, having this moment. And it was probably one of the most recent photos where I attach so much emotion to it, because it was very much an emotional moment. And I think this is what I described before, where you're kind of on set and all of a sudden you're flashing back to that first moment when you click buy on one of the camera websites. You're like, oh, my new camera will be here. Or, you know, you get so excited and to start this whole photography journey, and you're wondering where it's going to take you. And there I was, standing there with this band playing, and these guys are just these amazing musicians, couldn't have been nicer to us. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. And this is exactly why I do this.
Now, I can't quite tell, but by the side profile of that piano player, that does look to me like Ellis Marsalis. I don't know if he was in the Preservation Jazz space. He's passed in recent years, but I don't know if he was ever in the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. But I know he's one of the big names down there in New Orleans, so it could be very likely that was him, and that's super, super cool. That's
Yeah,
super cool.
it's probably not him, because this was just in October.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, so if he had passed away prior to that, obviously,
Yeah. It won't be him.
Yeah.
Cool experience nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right. I absolutely love this one. This gives me like Paul Newman feels.
Yes. You know what? I hadn't even thought of that. I was looking at this in terms of, like, I love the classic Abercrombie ads. I love the classic, what is it? The drawing a blank on it, but like the old J. Crew ads, like that kind of stuff. And this, we shot this on film. Chad, the model, has been around for, he's been working in the industry for a long time. He's shot with all of these amazing, great photographers over the last, however many years. And he knew he knew what we were going for. And that's my truck that he's standing up on, and he just got into character and he nailed it. And the photo came out, I looked at it, and it's like beautiful. I love it. One of my favorites.
This is film too?
It's film. Yeah. It's my,
So I was just going to say, what do you have a preference, or what do you like about film versus digital, or where do you land on that debate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the ability to manipulate the digital. I shoot with an R5. I absolutely love the files. I've been shooting Canon since forever, but have been through the Canon 5D, the original one, Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV. The R5 is absolutely my favorite camera. I love being able to tone and edit, color grade the digital files. That said, there is something absolutely magical about developing the film. And the black and white film I develop and scan at home. The color film I used to develop at home, but it got too time consuming. So I send that out. But there's something magical about seeing those photos, pulling them off the reel and looking and saying, oh, these might be good. And then you scan them in and you're like, oh, this is great. I love this. And I don't know that I have. I mean, obviously, my preference would probably be to shoot film a lot more, but with prices and with
Yeah.
the need to um, just be totally consistent for clients all the time. Digital obviously has its its place, its huge place. But film for me is something that I try to bring on every shoot. I try to line item it with clients if they request it. I'm like, oh, I can shoot film too, and there's been definitely an increase in clients who are asking for film specifically to be shot, which is nice.
Amazing. That's great. Do you like black and white film over color film, or you can go either way?
I can probably go either way. I do if I'm shooting just personal stuff. Yeah, I probably would have to lean color. Only because black and white film is amazing and I love it, but it's very, I'll say easy, but it's easier to replicate a digital file to black and white film.
Mm.
Um, Color film, I know people have presets and tones and all this other kind of stuff, and I'm pretty good with that kind of stuff too. And I think I always tell people, I can get my digital files to look about 95% like a film photo. I said, but it's that last 5%, that last 10% that really makes the film pop and really be worth it for me. So I would probably lean more color film just because it's still a little, special and unique. Whereas black and white is great, but it's easier to replicate.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I love these backlit shots. These are great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a big backlit fan. And I'm glad to see it coming back. It's for a
Did it
long
go away
time.
for a while?
It did go away for a long time. I was shooting these backlit golden hour sunset type things, and there was a real period of time where it sort of dried out, and nobody wanted. And I'm saying like nobody wanted, but I'm basing it all off of like what I see, you know, brands and clients and all that kind of stuff. And then you have a couple of big name photographers start to shoot some backlit and post some backlit stuff, and all of a sudden everybody's like, "Oh, I gotta shoot backlit again." And I'm like, "Finally, we're back. I can do it." I love it.
Now you did something in this image that is very interesting, and like for okay, so I shoot portrait and I shoot landscape,
Mm.
and for landscape it's like anathema to have an unstraight horizon, but for some
Oh
portraits
yeah.
you add a little bit of an angle to it or whatever, and I didn't even know, like, because this looks just perfect. I didn't even notice until like really studying the image that you got like the angle line in the back, but it really, really works for this.
Yeah. It's one like it's one of those things where it's all, especially working with, there were three things working here that I had to consider was the backlit not blinding my camera, the the model being comfortable with the animals. The animals themselves, the sheep were very skittish and they were constantly running back and forth. This was after about an hour she was able to kind of get in there and start petting them. And if you look, the animal to the right of the frame is their Pyrenees, their dog,
Mm.
Vinny, and he's the one who guards the pen and all that kind of stuff at night from the coyotes. And he was just a big lover. Like he just could not leave either one of us alone. So I do tend to angle my shots a little bit, but I also, like you said, for landscape stuff, I tend not to angle it. But for portrait stuff, I do, which is weird because I never really thought about that before. But yeah, um, but here I think it kind of gave it a little bit of movement that I wanted. It framed it perfectly, um, and it really kind of. I played around with a lot of the images from this shoot for a while, and it took a minute. It took a while actually to settle on like this is what I want this one to look like. And then as soon as I stumbled upon it, I guess. I was like, oh, this is how it's gonna work. This is where it's gonna live.
I love the composition too. Like it's
Thank you.
very balanced. Like so it's like a yin and a yang.
Yeah, I love her arm going right across because I feel like
Yeah.
it connects because her arm goes across, and then the sheep kind of, you can almost see, if you follow the frame, it connects with like her boot, I think, and it just circles back around again.
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. And some more backlight here. Amazing. This is so good.
Thanks. Yeah, I love going big. I love dramatic. I love, like I said, I was so happy that backlit stuff is coming back in fashion for this kind of stuff, because I love it. I think that there's life to it. There's movement to it. There's, it shows, I mean, above and beyond the movement of her hair being in an open convertible, that's one thing. But I think it just sort of, the backlit adds to the moment, and it's very lifestyle, but it's also, there's a cinematic aspect to it, which I really find myself loving.
Do you have a preference when shooting portraits to do kind of your tight, intimate portraits like that one, or a wider whole body? Like, is there one that you gravitate more towards?
Probably no. I would say that's probably a rare example. I don't really do too tight cropping, or I don't kind of, I tend not to go too close because I like storytelling, and I feel like, portraits are great, but I love like having a little bit wider of a frame, not necessarily full landscape, full frame, but I do love maybe like 3/4 is probably, if you looked at my work, that's what probably stand out more. Yeah, I do love that, but there's also room, I think, for like the wide establishing shot. There's also room for like the tight portrait that shows the emotion in your face. Um, I think a good mix, but I probably lean more towards like a 3/4 frame.
Awesome. Like this one, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
This is from that same. This is from the
It's
same
from the
one we
same
just saw.
Yeah, yeah. And these guys were just incredible. They're a couple, and very happy to just shoot together. And yeah, I rented a car and we drove to Malibu, and just was like, all right. I didn't even have to tell them, the scene. They knew, like, you guys are dressed in these amazing clothes, and we're going on the beach at sunset, and here we go. And they took over.
Did they know each other prior to this, or they just?
Oh yeah, no, they've been a couple for a while.
Oh,
They were a
you said
couple
that.
in real
You
life.
said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. And this next couple was for the same shoot. Oh, cool. You got the bird in there too.
Yeah, the bird was a paid extra to,
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes you get lucky. I love this photo because I think it's a good commercial shot. It's a good lifestyle shot. It has just, there's
See the sun heck into the sunglasses too.
yeah, the sunglasses. I keep waiting for the I think
Ray-Ban
the
ask
couple of shots. Yeah.
And the light, eh? That you can't. Oh, this you?
That's me. Yeah.
There you go.
In fact, Bram took that shot. We were on a job a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I was testing out to see if the swing worked for the model, and I was like, "Hey, get some BTS with me."
As you do.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorites. I love this because it's kind of, I was constantly trying to experiment a little bit with, framing and angles, and not necessarily the straight on typical portrait. And these guys were just kind of going about their thing. And I said, oh, might be a good frame through the windshield. And it works. I love it. And I think it's got some movement to it also in terms of framing.
Yeah, and you got that great contrast with the kind of shadow on them, and then the bright reflection of the water there on the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I don't want to, lead anybody astray here. None of this is all shot. Speaking of jazz, this is all just sort of like in the moment. Let's just see what we get. You guys go do this. I'm going to circle around, and, I'll figure it out after. But I know that there's some good moments there. There's some good, some really good moments, and I'm just there to capture them and let those guys do the work. Same.
That's great. It's like a little voyeur, like behind the other side of the counter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, And it's funny because I think I might have started out trying to get my reflection in the rear view,
Oh,
the
wow. Okay.
polished side of it. So I think there's one photo where they're out of focus and I'm in focus in
In the mirror here.
the mirror. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, one of my favorites. That's
This
probably
color on this is great.
yeah. That's Portra 800. Shot that on my Mamiya 645 AFD, and just Remy, the model, the stylist, everything came together, and one of my favorite shoots that I've done ever. It just was completely, here's your character, here are some amazing clothes, we're gonna drive around. That's Bram's Forerunner, and we just got some great stuff, really great stuff. But I love this one. And this was probably the photo I would go to when somebody says black and white or color. This
Right.
photo, because it's just, when I
Color's
saw this coming out of the tank or coming out of the scanner, I was just like, oh yeah.
How I guess it might change for you whether it's film or digital, but typically when you're on a shoot, how many images do you take and how many do you end up with?
It changes. I try to, if I can get through a shoot with, I want to say it depends on how excited I get. Like for this shoot, I think I shot maybe 5 rolls of 120, and then maybe 2 rolls of I did 3 rolls of color, 2 rolls of black and white, 120, and then I did a full roll of 35 millimeter. But there are other shoots. So we did a commercial client a couple weeks ago in Bermuda, and we shot 13 rolls of film, and we come back anywhere between, let's say like a low end would be maybe 500 images of digital to 2,500. It depends on how many looks we're doing. If it's 5 looks, it's usually a couple hundred images per look. And that I think is justified by not, or you can justify that by saying, well, we're not doing just plain posing. We're having like, these are moments, these are movement. There's a lot of like closed eyes. There's a lot of off camera. There's a lot of stuff that just, I missed focus. So it's not anywhere close to like, oh, we took 500 photos. We have 490 keepers.
Right.
Not even close.
Yeah, I find that just kind of in and about, it seems that I usually keep about 10% of what I shoot. Is that typical for you?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good, one second. It's probably a good 10 to 15% is probably a good number. I try to, there's some of the film shots where I've made the contact sheet and I've been very surprised by like, well, there were 15 shots on or 16 shots on a roll of 120, 14 of them were good. I'm like, all right, should I be shooting more film? And then I'll get another roll back and it's like 2 of them were good.
Right.
And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, keep myself humble. So yeah.
That's crazy. You shoot, like you can shoot for however many years and you could be so experienced, but then you get a roll or you upload them in the Lightroom or whatever, and you look at them and you're like, what was I thinking?
Exactly. It's like we're trying to figure out where and I know the answer to this question, like where the weakest link is. It's not the camera. Camera doesn't make any better. It's not the film. It's, the weakest link is the photographer, obviously. Like, what I do different? The exact same thing.
It's all the light's fault. Bad light. It's just the light.
Yeah, exactly.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prairie View Photo Tours. Prairie View Photo Tours invites photographers of all levels to book their all-inclusive, authentic Alberta adventure at pvphototours.com.
So last year, I was contacted by this brand called Omeo, and they make a mobility device for people who have limited or no mobility in their legs, or due to spinal injuries or something like that. And one of the lead development or marketers had followed me for years through social media and that sort of thing, and he contacted me. He said, hey, I've been waiting for this opportunity to work with you. He's like, I'm in this position. We're doing this whole campaign. Would love to talk to you if you're interested in shooting this. I know it's not what you normally shoot. And I saw what it was, and I was like, I am 100% in on this. Let's do it. And so we spent about 6 months planning out this shoot, because it brought together so many moving parts, and it was we shot it over 3 days in San Diego, and brought in users of the mobility devices. I think we brought in 6 users from all over the country, and a couple of people who I just learned. The gentleman on the left side there, actually, they both had just learned how to use it that morning.
Oh.
And they're both in wheelchairs in real life. I guess that makes most sense to say. But they were new to the Omeo, and basically we wanted this campaign to say, like, this is a device that is for people who want to, kind of normalize and kind of do things that a regular wheelchair is not capable of doing. And it's based on, like, not to add a commercial here in for it, but it's basically it's gyroscopic, I believe, based on like the same technology as like Segway. So if you kind of lean forward a little bit, there's hand controls, but also you're able to control it by forward, backward leaning.
Awesome.
And we shot this over 3 days, and it was probably one of the biggest productions that I've done, and it was by far one of the most rewarding that I've done, because to see some of the folks, some of the models come in and just say, well, I don't know that I'm going to enjoy this, and then immediately, like within 5 minutes of figuring out how to do it, taking to it, and then it goes to about 12 miles an hour and just flying up and down the beach, just completely, for the first time. It may be in 10, 15 years, depending on when they were injured.
That's incredible. I love seeing companies or products, whatever, that solve a problem like that.
It was amazing, absolutely amazing, and it definitely was one of the things where we're kind of standing around, and it was a big production, and we put it all together, and you're like, oh, there can be actual like meaning to this, and there can be actual, it's not just like shooting this fashion that comes and goes within a few months.
Yeah,
this is long term, and this is actually like changing people's lives.
Go back to Remy now.
Remy, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess okay. Good. There's a couple of them here. And these are these you mentioned shooting rolls of film with them. Are these film? These are digital.
No, this is digital. That's digital also. Within the last year, I really kind of settled and found my voice, I guess, in terms of color grading, color tone, what I want my photos to look like. Because as anybody knows, it's a journey, and you start out, wanting to try all of these different things, and you start out wanting to say, well, I can do it color, I can do black and white, I can do it, lifted shadows, I can do so many different things. And I think it was maybe a year or two ago where I kind of was like, oh, this is what I want my photos to look like. And that kind of spread across my body of work since, and it's really brought in a lot of things. But this photo is probably is one of my favorites from the shoot also, because it's fun, and it's real, and it's, it's colors look great. The clothes look great. Remy's smiling, happy. I'm happy. I'm probably smiling back in my camera.
How do you approach color grading in your work? Like what you mentioned color grading and how you want your images to look. So do you have a system in place for yourself? Like what's your process?
Pretty much. So I've been using Capture One for 9 years or something like that now, whatever it was. But I used to be an ambassador with them, and a few years ago, they had asked me and approached me and asked me to make my own presets, which I did, and for a while they were selling on the website. And in that process, I discovered a lot of tools and tricks and a lot of things I had just kind of not really spent a lot of time on previously. I just sort of was like, oh, film presets, and slap this one on, it looks like portrait, slap that one on, it looks like Tri-X. And then when I finally started doing like a real deep dive into it, I discovered, a lot of things that I had kind of glanced over in terms of like shadows and highlights and
Mm.
color, and especially now with the file, like I was talking about before, with the files from the R5, they're just so, the dynamic range is just, it's incredible compared to what it was even 5 years ago. And you're able to bring highlights and lift shadows and bring things back. And, so I don't necessarily know that I have an overriding like rule or philosophy or anything, because I'm constantly towing the line between this is what I want my photos to look like and this is what the clothes look like in real life. And there's always like, I want my photos to look like a nostalgic, like an, you know, sort of like a throwback a little bit, but I don't want them to look too digital. I don't want them to look too like I'm trying to make them look like film. Um, Obviously, I want them to be able to stand next to my film photos and not be too far removed from them. But yeah, it's. I think I don't want to say I take every photo, knowing what I'm going to do with it, but I would say in the last few years, I've definitely moved more towards like knowing what the photos are going to look like once I'm done toning them, as I'm actually taking them, which I think was a huge growth point for me, because early on you're just like, oh, I want to take as many photos as I want, and I'm going to try a dozen different presets, and whatever works, and now it's more of like a, you have an aesthetic, and you have an overall body of work that you want to look kind of similar, at least. And I think looking at my website, I try to maintain like, all right, I don't want anything to stand out too much, but there's a a range that I like to have.
So when you're creating that box or those boundaries for that playground for you and your subjects to kind of improvise within, and you're thinking of that aesthetic and color grading, now are you choosing? You're going and seeing what's out there, but are you choosing backgrounds according to, matching it for the color of the jacket, for example?
No, that was completely random, because we had scouted that the week before the shoot, and then the stylist and I were just driving around taking pictures, and we scouted probably about a dozen places. And I didn't know what the clothes looked like until I showed up at the stylist place to start going through them. And yeah, it was, I didn't, I don't think I realized how closely it matched until I had been like, when I took a breath after the shoot and got home and started looking and said, oh, wait a minute, it actually works really well, because not only is it, similar, but it's almost exact between the fences and the jacket and the shirt and everything else. It just was, and I'm thinking like, maybe she did that, maybe the stylist.
Yeah, it's like maybe I did stylist, yeah.
Yeah, because she's really good. I actually wouldn't put that past her, because she's brilliant. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Isn't it great when you're working on a shoot? I haven't worked on large shoots as a photographer,
Yeah.
but I've worked with makeup artists on some smaller shoots, and just like how much difference, like experiencing a shoot where maybe we're a model that maybe isn't that skilled at doing makeup, makeup, and then you have a makeup artist that just knows what you're going for, that just does it, and the difference in the end is amazing.
100% difference. And I think that's probably my advice to a lot of photographers who reach out to me and say, how do you elevate your work? And I said, well, you have to not try to do everything. Be a photographer. Don't be the person, don't be the makeup artist. Don't be the stylist. Don't be the, and when you get to bigger sets, don't be the creative director. Don't be the producer. Don't be all of this stuff. Just be the photographer. Allow yourself to be, in that creative space, because if you spend so much time worrying about each aspect of the shoot, you're going to get there and you're going to be completely disinterested in it. And I'm speaking from experience.
Love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I used to shoot a ton of swimwear, and every once in a while I go back, especially living in Southern California, you kind of have to, if you want to stay on people's radars. So yeah, shooting some swim, but also elevated, also like nice clothing, the sunset This was probably a couple hours before sunset, so we had this great like golden glow.
Yeah.
It's pretty much classic California that I love.
I don't think I've ever seen a shot with that like driftwood in there. That's a bad shot. That just makes things so beautiful.
Yeah, and actually, to answer your question from before, to further answer it, I look for, I try to look for textures, and I'm trying to train myself to look for like interesting backgrounds and textures and things that are going to just not be just someone standing somewhere randomly. There's got to be some sort of something. And yeah, the driftwood just is amazing, and we just got lucky that it was there.
One thing that I noticed through these shots that you're really good at, and is one thing I spoke to Bram about that he's really good at as well, is that creating, and stylist is responsible for this to a degree as well, as we just talked about, but having the style match the environment. Like some people throw some shoots. It's like here's a prop, here's an outfit, and here's like this back that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cognitive dissonance. But when you have like someone with some flip flops and a bathing suit and a little like shirt like that, sitting on the beach in the sun, that makes sense, right?
I think so. Yeah. And I think, it's all storytelling for me.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, it's storytelling. And I think the overall image, I guess, or set of images has to make sense. And like you said, like she wouldn't be, like, yeah, you can, put like a juxtaposition in there where she's wearing winter clothes in the summer. And it was like, what is it? What are we doing here? But I'll leave that to other people. I really like, the mood has to, the clothing has to match the environment for me. But
it makes it look. It also makes it look natural, effortless. Right? Like I can project myself into that image because it just looks like an image. It looks like an environment, a natural occurring thing that would happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think early on, I recognized that I want my images to look kind of like, I tend to shoot a little bit warmer, or I tone a little bit warmer for some of the stuff, especially the beach stuff. I want them to look, kind of like warm memories, sort of, like I said, nostalgic, sort of, that's that kind of thing, which is what makes me happy about the backlit golden hour stuff.
Golden hour is so good.
So good.
Do you have a preference between the AM golden hour or the PM golden hour?
It's probably PM because there's a hard stop at the end of it.
Right.
There's and then I'm not also up at like 5 a.m. The morning golden hour is nice. The light is obviously a lot cleaner in terms of temperature, I guess. But yeah, we did a shoot. We're actually in Bermuda a couple of weeks ago, and the first look was on the beach at sunrise. And it was beautiful, but within like 20 minutes, it went from like soft, beautiful sunlight to all of a sudden it's like, all right, blue sky, harsh light. Let's go move.
If you ever get a chance coming up here to Northern Alberta for a visit, in the summertime, we have basically the light goes from in the sky to just kind of dips under the horizon where you can still see the glow. And then a couple hours later, it's back up over here.
Oh, you're that far north. Oh, wow.
Yeah, we get, like in the summertime, it basically doesn't get dark. Like it's not full daylight, but the sky doesn't get dark. There's always a glow of the sun.
Oh, that's amazing. Like, that is a golden hour.
It's weird at noon looking up at the sky and you look over here and there's the sun and over there's the moon just as bright.
That is so strange. Yeah, eventually we'll get up that way. I've been to BC before. I've been to Vancouver and Whistler, but not over that way where you are.
Whistler's nice.
Yeah.
Love it. This is great.
Yeah.
Who does?
Absolutely my favorite thing on earth to photograph. Yeah, and she's right here next to me. But
what's her name?
Yeah, the Olive. Yeah. But yeah, I mean the classic, the personal project type stuff, the personal snapshots on film, always a favorite.
We had these wildfires here, as I was talking before we were recording there, and they have evacuated a lot of people from the area north of me, not north, excuse me, west of me. And so they've been shipped out to different places. And so there's been a lot of dogs and cats and stuff that have been displaced. So my wife was actually volunteering at the local agricultural complex where they're housing probably 100 dogs and probably an equivalent amount of cats, the turtles, ducks, whatever, feeding them, walking them, keeping them taken care of while everybody was getting sorted. So they just today actually were having a rescue come up because a lot of them were left unclaimed.
Yeah.
And, there's just so many there. Anyway, so they have a rescue coming up from Edmonton to cart them down there, and they won't be going to like a kill shelter or anything. So
Yeah.
whatever ones aren't claimed are going to be down there to be put up for adoption and stuff. So
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, great photo. Makes me really thankful for mine. She's out in the back there. She's not there with me. But how old is she? How old is she now?
She'll be 14 in August.
Wow, that's a good age.
Yeah, she's an old lady.
Wow. Well, awesome, Olaf. Good. Is this the same shoot as before? But
It is. Yeah, there's a bunch in there. It's that's just a snapshot. I love it because you can just barely see his smile.
yeah.
I think, yeah. That's up close. I don't do too many portraits, but I do love like a dramatic, give me some sunset, give me a shadow, and I just love it. And Kojo is a friend, and he's an incredible model, also an incredible mover. And he knew the assignment. We did some really, really great stuff. Sunset in just north of Malibu.
Awesome.
That's so that's a friend of mine. He was actually the gentleman with the beard in the shot from New Orleans in the Heavy Jackets. So when we shot there, I found out he's an artist. He's a painter, incredibly talented. He lives on Long Island in Manhattan, and we were talking about that sort of thing, and I said, I've always been wanting to. I've always been wanting to, and coming into like artist spaces and photographing them while they work, and just kind of getting to know and getting to see like the space that we create. And he was working on a project. He was actually just finishing up. That's a portrait of Rick Rubin, the producer. And yeah.
I've been on him a lot lately, actually.
Yeah, he's got a great new book out, which I highly recommend.
Right.
Yeah. So I came in and we shot some stuff. We were there. We were in New York on Long Island for a photo shoot, and we had to drive past where he lives. And I messaged him. I was like, "Hey, I'll be passing by your place. Would love to stop and say hi. Also, would you be into me coming and photographing you while you worked?" And he was like, "Absolutely." So we spent about an hour and a half catching up and photographing. And I love this one because it's the process, and it's it's the artist surrounded by his work in his studio, in his space.
I love that. I love watching, and it could be pick your craft or job or whatever trade or anything. Someone who's a master at what they do, I just love watching what they
Me too.
they do.
Yeah, and it's really inspiring in so many ways, because your initial thought, I think, is to say, oh, well, he's a master or she's a master, and I'll never get to that point. But just to see somebody so completely wrapped up and so completely just in their element is hugely inspiring.
Awesome. So John, we have at the bottom there, we have the ticker going across with your website and your Instagram. Is there other spots that you like to direct people to find you, or should they just go there?
No, that's pretty much it. My Instagram is probably where I'm most active. Fortunately, unfortunately, I mean, it's just the sign of the times. I would love to be one of those people who's like, oh, I don't have social media, but we need it, and I've gotten a ton of work from it. So yeah, my Instagram is probably where most recent work goes and where I'm most active. My website is great if you want to just take a look at my overall body of work. I'm in the process of updating it, and I'm adding some projects to it. that I've shot over the last few years. So it's always, as always, a work in progress, as is everything else, apparently.
So normally I ask people if they got a project or something on the go that they want to draw attention to. But I mean, I know you're pretty busy and you're shooting all the time, but is there any kind of special projects or any personal projects you want to draw attention to?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's the studio visit project, which we just talked about. There's that one. There's I'm still kind of building another one that kind of just working around the parameters of what it's going to look like. And so that one I'll kind of hold off on, but it's I'm trying to think of, there's some like travel project stuff. There's always probably just the studio visit is the most solid one at the moment. There's always like stuff flying around that I'm like, oh, that would be a cool project. I did do a photo book a couple of years ago.
Oh, cool.
It was self-published, nothing, nothing, earth-shattering, but I really loved it. It's shot on film and some digital, and it was just, some street photography, but with a little bit of a not, I don't say a twist, but it street photography from our travels over the last like 5 or 10 years.
Nice. Is that book still available for purchase anyway?
It's purchased. It's print on demand at this point. It was available for a while, and then now it's just if anybody's interested, feel free to email me. I can get a copy out.
Great. Awesome. John, thank you so much for coming on today. I really loved chatting with you and just investing in your work and your process and exciting stuff. I'm more excited to stay in touch and to see what you're up to as you go.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I hope that, if anybody has any questions or maybe feels sort of stuck or, they don't know which way to go in terms of their work, that this was maybe a little helpful. It's one of those things where you just have to keep working through it. And I'm always available if anybody wants to reach out and email me. Always happy to chat about photography and film and all that stuff.
Sure, John. Appreciate that. Have yourself a good one.
Thank you. You too.